Well, thanks for coming today to this seminar on authentic storytelling. All the filmmakers on the panel today are here to discuss films which are often covering quite sensitive and emotive subjects, and sometimes stories which are perhaps underrepresented in the media. And the session today is really to discuss how filmmakers can tell those diverse and perhaps marginalised voices without necessarily compromising their subject. So to introduce the panel, I have filmmaker Katie Sexton, who has made, I'd say, quite a few critically acclaimed films, like My Parents and Me, which told the story of children whose parents are in prison. And today she'll be talking about the BAFTA-nominated Raped, My Story, which features a testimony of 10 victims of rape. I have Auburn Wallace, who's the founder of Gallivant Films. He's produced and directed a number of music videos and commercial content. And he's just directed his first feature documentary, Another News Story, which turns his lens on the journalists following the story of the migration of Syrian refugees to Europe. Paul Seng, whose work often focuses on those who are marginalised or who challenge the status quo. And he'll be talking about his second feature, Dispossessed, the Great British Housing Swindle, all about Britain's housing crisis. And then I have Sasha Jerkovic, whose films are often focused on trust and access, and in trying to build the trust of contributors in many of her films. Some of her films include Brain Doctors for BBC Two and Protecting the Children, and she's here to talk about her recent film Panorama, Last Chance Mums, all about mothers who are addicted to alcohol or drugs, and they're a rehab centre that they're able to get assistance for their addiction. And I'd like to start first with you, Auburn, your film Another News Story. Can you say a little bit about the film? What made you make it, just before we see a clip?
Yeah.
Background.
So Another News Story is it's a film about the journalists following the refugees across Europe. But we went out in September 2015 originally to make a film about the refugee crisis with a small crew. We set up a crowdfunding campaign and we kind of left for Europe with not really an exact idea of the story we were going to tell. And then we arrived in Budapest. You may remember the kind of scenes on the news of when all the refugees were marching down the motorway from Budapest to Austria, and that was the exact time when we arrived. But we also arrived at the same time as every other filmmaker in the world, it appears, and every other journalist and news crew. So we were quite quickly realising that we were just kind of asking the same questions, and the refugees are kind of telling the same story of how sad their journey was, and for us we're kind of like not really knowing at that point how we could tell something which would be different. Our plan was then just to set off to Greece and to Lesbos, where the boats were arriving, so we could then follow the natural migration across Europe, because then at least give us some form of arc to our story. But on the way down, when we arrived on the Hungarian border, on the way down there, we kind of ran into this kind of very chaotic scene of about 1,000 refugees running up the motorway towards us. And that was the first thing we filmed, and we kind of witnessed a kind of very horrific scene of a dad like shaking his baby, but then just kind of witnessing how all the news journalists were rushing to try and get his image and pushing everyone out of the way to kind of film this dad shaking his baby in front of people. And in that moment I kind of clocked this kind of different perspective of the news journalists. And then that night when we were putting up our tents to go and just camp, we were going to sleep next to where the refugees were, and then we kind of saw the NBC news crew from America setting up to go live while the refugees were kind of asleep at their feet, and it was this laughing, joking banter. And we kind of, for me, it was this different perspective I'd never seen. It's kind of quite a cynical side.
Yeah. Quite a challenge there to kind of turn up at the border and see a sea of journalists, and then at what point did you decide on what the story would be?
It was that night. I mean, the very first clip, you see Bruno. He's a 25-year veteran, and they all were, him and Richard Engel and Johnny. They've been reporting every war, so we kind of ran into one of the most experienced crews, and within that scene that night, and the kind of the interview I got with Bruno, and the kind of understanding of the next level of what it was to be behind the camera, and the kind of how we are then filtering our stories back home, and how we only see these little moments. And then when I arrived in Greece, and you witnessed the boats coming, but the first thing they had was just a wall of cameras, and from there, that kind of understanding of how we filtered our media, that was when, for me, I kind of knew this was the angle I really wanted to carry. And then we were just lucky enough to find the same journalists along the route throughout the story. The whole thing was very spontaneous, but yeah, we were lucky to have imagined.
So what sort of message did you want to get across? What were the sort of challenges of making a story that's changing constantly? How did you kind of deal with that?
I mean, at the time we were 5 guys driving a car across Europe with no editorial commission support. It's just us, kind of working out the story as we were going. So at the time we were just kind of no time to review stuff. It was just very much that we were kind of just trying to keep with our characters as much as possible. And it was very much a story made in the edit, and when we could start weaving our kind of stories together. But the main message we wanted to tell was of just how it's not black and white, the media, and how difficult it is for journalists, some on both sides, and also how the refugees, through this film you actually get to meet the refugees and you'll come away from it with understanding of who they are. But very often in the media you just get these little tiny clippets often of pushing on trains or kind of the scenes of chaos. So I kind of wanted to tell a film which kind of gave a deeper understanding behind it.
Yeah, because Bruno's quite cynical, comes across very sort of a cynic, but then there's another guy, Francesco, who you actually see journalists actually intervening as well, and he helps a refugee onto a train. So you're obviously witnessing journalists crossing the line and the ethics there as well. I mean, how did you come to a decision about how you're going to portray that and get that across in film?
Well, I suppose, I think what our film has been, people have heralded it as a very honest film. I mean, for us, we didn't want to kind of stamp our opinions on it as filmmakers. It's very much a film which lets you decide, make up your mind about journalists and them. And the journalists we witness, we witness people who are trying to help, but then we also witness people, who are tripping over refugees. We kind of saw it all. And the film kind of very much presents kind of an open window into the period of time which we were following.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm going to move on to Katie's film now. This was aired not very long ago, actually, on Channel 5. Rape Russell story. Tell me a little bit about how this film came about and the background to it, because it's not a subject. It was testimony of 10 people who are telling their story of rape for the first time. What prompted this?
It's interesting. It was a really visionary commission by Channel 5. They thought it was important to do a 90-minute film about rape. This was well before the whole Harvey Weinstein thing had come about and before the Me Too campaign. We were actually in the edit when that all emerged. And Lambent Productions came up with a really interesting idea of looking at the subject of rape by trying to tell the stories behind the statistics. And I hadn't realised this, but there are about 100,000 estimated rapes each year, of which about 3% result in a conviction. And I think the knowing about the conviction rate was very familiar to me, but actually really unpicking and peeling back at what the experiences of rape victims I felt was interesting territory that hadn't been explored. So we decided to pick people who did represent the statistics. About 70% of people don't report rape. So those are people who may never speak about it, who may never tell anyone. And we wanted to get every experience from that right through the criminal justice system to see what the experience was like for victims, how a case was won and lost, and to explore that in its entirety.
And you had to get, they had to obviously waive their anonymity as well.
Yeah, so we had the idea, and then actually to make that idea work was obviously a huge challenge. Any victim of rape has the right to anonymity by law, and to get 10 people to do that was obviously going to be quite difficult. But actually, I think that we were on the crest of a wave, and when I went out, I went all around the country to try and meet people, and obviously when we met them, it was very important that we, did that, whether they had a counsellor with them or a family member, because actually having a conversation about what had happened to them was really traumatic in itself. Mm. But I felt there was a kind of palpable hunger for people to have a voice, actually, interestingly. Mm-hmm. And there were people who did want to come forward and tell their story.
So 90 minutes of film with 10 testimonies, quite a feat, really, to try and to kind of obviously keep interest as well during that time, and quite harrowing details as well in some of those.
Yeah, we originally when we set out, we were going to. There was always the idea to do, personal testimonies down the lens, but we were going to kind of have some more voices around that and make it a little bit more 360. But actually, the people we had in the film were incredibly amazing and articulate, and were just so compelling. Their actual testimonies were so compelling that we decided to strip all of that out and just have them tell their stories. And until we got onto the edit, we didn't really know how that was going to work. But actually, when we started to cut them together, there was this really strong sense of a universal story of rape. Every story resonated with each other. And we were able to kind of debunk a lot of the myths around rape, which are, problematic and are part of the reason why juries don't convict as much as they should, because they have this perception of what rape is, that rape is, by a stranger. Well, in fact, rape, if you're 90% more likely to be raped by somebody that you know, not by a stranger. So we were able to really unpick all of this by kind of combining their stories together.
Yeah, and there's one particular story that I wanted to talk about, was of Elizabeth, who and it was marital rape, so it was different, I think, from the other 9. And a lot of the stories are quite grueling. It's quite hard to watch, but hers in particular, there must have been, because it was she had young children, and it was quite a severe form of abuse as well.
Yeah.
The challenges of telling those stories as well, and what to pick, and how much of that you can get away with saying as well.
It's an interesting one to pick, because I was really keen to do something on marital rape, but unless that had been a story where there was a conviction, it's quite hard for us to do that. And in Elizabeth's circumstances, her husband, as you will find out if you've seen the film or you watched the film, her husband actually died. But she had been married to him for 26 years and experienced extreme abuse in their marriage. She was drugged and filmed and so on. And the difficulty with her case was that she had 2 grown-up children that was also their father. So we had quite a lot of conversations with her and her new partner and her children about that and how we could do this, obviously with their consent. They were incredibly supportive of their mother telling her story. They felt that was more important over everything else, so she was incredibly lucky that she has these amazing sons.
And was there an issue of how much to include, like how much to sort of say as well? Because some of it is quite graphic in terms of some of the testimonies, quite graphic. In terms of what do you leave out and what do you include?
Yeah, we sort of sometimes the other people's stories would impact on the whole, and sometimes we take things out and put them back in because we think it was. The most important thing is that we wanted people to watch it and to really understand what the experiences were for the victims. And so we had to make that digestible. but also we wanted to honour their experience. And so with Elizabeth, there was some quite graphic things, but there's getting that balance of it not being prurient and salacious, but having an impact too, and also honouring her story. And in the end, we did take some things out that we felt were too much, but we kept some things in that are really difficult to hear. But that we felt honoured her.
And I guess, this is the same in your film, Orban, as well. The duty of care that you have to your contributors as well. Did you show the film to your contributors?
Yeah, so we had, whenever I met them, we would always offer them to meet me with a counsellor. We had the chair of the sort of Survivors Trust, which is like Rape Crisis. She was our consultant, so she consulted us at every single stage throughout the film. We had counsellors available before the interviews. Everyone who came to the studio came with someone, because it was really important they had someone with them when they left. We had counselling for them after the interview. We had counselling available when they saw the film, because they were going to watch other people's experience of rape, not only their own. We had them come with somebody, and we also offered them counselling after that, and around transmission as well. So that was, and that was important, and you couldn't really do it any other way. It's really important to do that, because it's, it's a massive deal for them.
And what about
to do this?
You yourself, working on a subject like that and being, interviewing people sort of back to back?
Actually, we did 3 days in a row, and that was too much. I kind of knew it would be, but we the logistics of getting the team and everybody's availability, I think it would have been better if we'd staggered it a bit more, because it was difficult to do the interviews, but it was never as difficult for me as it was for them. So.
And what was the actual impact of the film on the contributors in the end? How did they receive it?
It's been amazing, actually. Elizabeth really feels that it has completely changed her life. I think a lot of them feel that they have sort of unburdened themselves from this sense of having a secret, of feeling that it's something they've had to own in terms of shame. They feel that they've been able to sort of get rid of that and to put it out there, and to just have a voice, to be heard and to talk about their experiences and to be listened to has been a massively important thing for all of them.
And did you find that you had to kind of spend some time building that relationship with your contributors? Did you?
Yes, I didn't meet, I sort of, I met them all at least 2 or 3 times before the interview, some only twice, because of time factors, but we gave them a lot of time to think about it, because we felt it was a really important decision for them to sort of put this on film, as it were, for eternity, and encourage them to go home and talk to their partners, their friends, anybody significant in their life, to really decide properly about whether this was the right thing to do. And there were some people where we decided together that it wasn't the right time for them to do it, and they didn't continue. So
it's really interesting. In terms of access, it was fascinating. It's fascinating to watch as well. And I think that's something open as well with your film as well. The sort of duty of care. How did you sort of manage that with your contributors there? Because you were sort of on the road a lot of the time.
Yeah, well, we build the relationship obviously with them, before we kind of carried on with them. We kind of asked for their consent for the film and kind of filming with them. But obviously the journalists, we didn't often have that much time.
No.
Everything we were doing was fast, so we just
grabbing them.
trying to get release forms on the go, and it was quite tricky. But they've since come and watched the film and been a part of Q&As and stuff. So.
No, thanks for that, Katie. We're going to talk about the third film now. Paul's saying you've made a film about. It was quite an in-depth film, actually. You've obviously done a lot of research and a lot of groundwork on this, and you've got access to communities that perhaps might be a little bit wary of the media. Tell me a little bit more about, so it's a film about the housing crisis.
Yeah, it's called Dispossession, the Great Social Housing Swindle, and it pretty much does what it says on the tin really. It's about the ongoing neglect, mismanagement and failure of government at both national and local level in regards to council housing. It's about the failures of social housing providers, and primarily it's about the residents, the people that it affects. So we worked with communities in London, Nottingham and Glasgow, and going back to what you were saying about earning people's trust, it is vital. What we had to do was get to know people a bit first, and you don't have a great deal of time, but you don't turn up on an estate with a camera. I think that's very disrespectful. So we met, where possible. A lot of the campaigners went to their meetings and began to earn their trust. And obviously documentary, as John Grierson said, is the creative treatment of actuality. And truth is a very subjective concept, but at various stages I made sure that we kept them involved, that we told their stories with them rather than for them, because the reason I got into this 3 years ago was to tell stories with people, not for them. I think that there's a problem in this country with the media, that the lens is very middle class, and not having an attack on the middle class here, because there's nothing wrong with being middle class, but middle class people can't speak for working class people and working class communities in the same way. And I'm very mindful of trying not to tell people's stories for them, but with them. So in terms of this film, that's what we set out to do. We screened 5 days before Grenfell happened. We had our premiere at the East End Film Festival, and obviously Grenfell changed everything, not just in housing, but in terms of the landscape of this country. And what we always wanted to do was, we did a tour of cinemas. We had about 130 screenings around the country, and we always just wanted to do a campaign in tandem with it, to raise awareness, to do Q&As, to have people on the panels that were local. And we had some brilliant guests. Obviously the most important people are the residents, people that out there campaigning. But we had Michael Sheen, we had our narrator Maxine Peake, we had Caroline Lucas, and then towards the end of last year we got Jeremy Corbyn. I've been very critical of what Labour are doing around housing, not the central party but at local level. It's Labour councils in London that are enabling social cleansing, and the message from on top of Labour is very different. So to get the leader of the Labour Party, and a man who may or may not be Prime Minister one day, to come to a Q&A, face a hostile audience, he knew that was going to happen. He has my respect for that. And I think it's not it's purely not just a film. I mean, the film was shown on Channel 5 last month in a 45-minute cut, but the work of Focus E15, Save Cressingham, Stop HDV, Central Hill, all these campaigns, Save the Fight for the Aylesbury, all of these campaigns, together with the film, have, I think, managed to influence party policy. Maybe government policy is going a bit far, because I don't really think that the Tory party see the value of council housing,
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it had a good impact, and that was, mainly due to having the, I was going to say buying, but that's just such a horrible industry word, I'm not going to say that. Having the trust of the residents.
So, how did you go about researching the film and getting?
We had a researcher, and I basically, I did a lot of research myself. I'm not going to take away the credit from Alistair. Initially, we worked out the estates we wanted to cover, so Cressingham Gardens, Central Hill, which didn't really make the final cut, unfortunately, and then things we wanted to look at in terms of what had happened with previous estates. So the Red Road estate, as most of you hopefully have heard of, in Glasgow, and what happened there. Because you need to have balance in these stories, because some people that lived in the Haygate loved it, other people hated it. It's one of those things, and they're always different sides of stories. So I mean, mainly the research was done via interviews, online, reading books. Lisa Mackenzie, her book Getting By, about estates in Nottingham. The St Anne's estate was vital research. Lisa's also in the film. Lindsay Hanley's estate, so that's a great book to read. But essentially, I mean, I think the best research in these situations is done by going out and meeting people. We interviewed in total we interviewed about 100 people. We filmed 80 interviews, and about 44, 45 made the final cut. But yeah, the best research, I think, is always done by testimony, really.
And I mean, you made it completely independently as well. How did you kind of set about trying to raise funds for that?
Yeah, well, the first part of the budget was raised via crowdfunding, which, you know, has its benefits and, you know, has its drawbacks. I think. I mean, we didn't meet the target. We raised about half of it. It was a tough sell, though. I mean, you know, you go back to 2016, a film about council housing. Who's going to want to go and see that? But you know, it grossed 75 grand at the UK box office. There was a desire to see a film like that, but yeah, we didn't really have enough money, so you know, we ploughed on. We got a grant from Vivian Westwood, donated some money. We got some money from a private investor, and then you know, I maxed out my credit cards. It was pretty stupid, really, because you know, it could have gone tits up and you know, I could be bankrupt, but it worked out. But I mean, it's very difficult to tell these stories. It's very difficult to find funding for them. You know, I've made 2 films. Hopefully, I'm going to make some more, but I'm not going to be doing crowdfunding again because it's hard. I mean, this man here will know how difficult it is. And probably some of the people in this room. It feels like begging sometimes, and I think it would be good to see more support for people that are crowdfunding, with people in the industry that are match funding those amounts, because clearly if there is, you know, an appetite for something and people have put in, you know, 20 grand or 75 grand or whatever, then match funding to actually bring that through to release would be very helpful.
But that's, you know, when you're sort of trying to tell these types of stories, as showing another light on the housing situation, and what you're actually doing is actually saying, well, actually, you know, because we're told regeneration is a great thing, and it can be, but this is the impact that it's having on communities. And often you're meeting communities that are a bit wary of the media as well. So how did you sort of deal with that, and what was the impact on them? Yeah,
I mean, I think we were fortunate in that I've got friends that are activists, and they were able you know, to make introductions and say, you know, you can trust Paul, he'll tell the story with you. That was hugely helpful. But I mean, it was quite odd for me the first time someone said, "Oh, you're from the media." I was like, "Me?"
Yeah.
But you know, I suppose that's how you're perceived, and if that's how you're perceived, then that's how you have to base a relationship with. You know, I suppose the work I do is journalistic, but I don't really see myself as being part of the media.
But you are a journalist as well.
Well, I haven't got an NUJ card, but maybe I am.
Great, thanks. And I'll move on to Sasha now. Again, another quite powerful film, which you've got some amazing access to some quite... So tell me a little bit more. It was about Trevi House, which is a rehab centre.
Yeah, there's two places left in the UK that they help women who are dealing with addictions. So there's a Trevi House in Plymouth and there's a Phoenix House in Sheffield. There's been lots more, but they got closed. And basically they're trying to work with women who decided to change their lives and come through addiction and fight to keep their kids. So the idea is of breaking the cycle. Years ago I worked on a series called Protecting Our Children, which was looking from the side of the child protection social worker. So it's kind of looking at the other side of it. And every parent wants to keep their child with them. So how do you ensure that actually that is in the best interest of a child? And what Trevi House does, that they are equipped. I mean, the woman would go through a very intense therapy session, and we'll see one of them. This is the end, actually, if you want to just kind of go a little bit further back. But the women who join in, I mean, you know, usually you get funded by your local cancel the NHS, and they stay there between 3 and 6 months. And what the Trevi does through the therapy session is asking them to look for the reasons why they have become an addict. And as one of the therapists often said to me, we feel sorry for the kids who are being abused, who are being neglected, but we forget that these kids will grow up and they will become angry adults who often end up in addiction. And unless you enable them to break the cycle, their children become them. So the session that the clip that we're about to see, it's one of the sessions in which the therapist is asking them to look at their family trees and to kind of find out what happens. And often these sessions, I was allowed to sit in some of them, and this was the one of them that I negotiated about filming and how to capture it. But it kind of it does disturb them.
Because obviously the mothers have past histories, and that you know there are other issues there. So how did you go about trying to get access to that particular therapy session?
I knew that they were going to have looking at the family, and I think for me it was really important to understand that the abuse, the actual addiction comes through abuse, and it's kind of often very deeply rooted within the family. So it was negotiating with Lee, who very kindly pushed the session as later as possible. So that gives me the chance to build that relationship with the woman and to be able to go in a session. After the first month we had I was only there for about 2 months, 2.5 months, and not you know, for the observational documentary, that's not really a long time. And the women were quite kind of, oh yeah, it's only Sasha, it's all right. But I knew that would be side effect to that session when they're going to be asked to look what's going to happen to them, and finding the place in which they feel comfortable that I'm there, and they're not feeling under any threat. They can talk about what they need to talk about because it's for them. Those sessions were for them, not for me. So it was, you know, again, as Paul said, it's working with people and finding kind of, you're constantly trying to measure when is the right time. And, you know, yeah, there was at one point that I just thought, okay, well next week will be fine, we're there, it's okay. And with Hayley, I always had a agreement that if she's not happy with me, she will show me a finger as a sign of kind of piss off and stop filming. So always giving people power to say no, rather than exploiting you know, the role of somebody who's got camera, because it's their story. I'm just a vehicle, really, that their story gets told through.